A radio show host in Seattle called Paul Gallant.
You are definitely living in the hindsight world today, Paul.
Do you feel there's been a consistent theme with the interceptions?
I think every interception really has a different story.
I was just kind of curious what Paul gets to see.
You got f***ing grow up, mother. Are you kidding me?
Paul Gallant, what the hell is wrong with you?
Hello. Ooh, we got an echo again. We got to figure out what the hell's going on with the audio issues. Every single time I've tried to start the show, there has been something weird going on. Let's see what's happening this time around. How about now? Does this change anything? Nope. Still a little bit of an echo. How about now? Is this better? Sounds like it's a little bit better. Okay, we'll see if this continues. Hello and welcome aboard another episode of the Gallant Says podcast. I am Paul Gallant on this Monday, January 9th of 2023. This show you can watch on Twitch, twitch.tv/Gallant Says, or YouTube, youtube.com/Paul Gallant, weekday afternoons at 1 o'clock Central. We got some people hanging out in the chat right now. Ectelion 4200 is hanging with me. You want to talk to the show, interact with the show, make fun of me, talk some shit. The way to do it is on Twitch or on YouTube. But you can also subscribe to this in podcast form: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. The 2022-2023 NFL regular season drew to a close last night, and we figured out who's going to be playing in the playoffs. On Saturday, the Seattle Seahawks, they squeezed their way into the playoffs with a little bit of help from from the Detroit Lions in Sunday Night Football. They're going to play the 49ers in the early afternoon game on Saturday. The late afternoon game on Saturday is going to be the Jacksonville Jaguars hosting the Los Angeles Chargers. Then you got a full slate, 3 games on Sunday, and on Sunday, off the top of my head, I think that it's going to lead off with, he said, as he filibusters to get the schedule out right in front of him. Sunday starts off with the Dolphins on the road against the Bills. You got the Giants and the Vikings in Minnesota, Baltimore and Cincinnati, and Dallas and Tampa Bay. Chiefs got the 1 seed in the AFC. Eagles got the 1 seed in the NFC. Some fun games to look ahead to this weekend. But today's Black Monday. This is the day that head coaches across the league are traditionally canned on, and sometimes general managers as well. It's become a day that marks hopeful change for bad organizations who put a spike up, and then they put a head on top of that spike, and I think that they hope that their fan base will buy into the idea that they hold the people who work for them accountable. The first team to make a move, though, did not even wait for Monday. That was the Houston Texans, who fired Lovie Smith less than 24 hours after, during his post-game press conference, he led things off like this.
Whenever you play, it's pretty simple. You play to win the game. It's kind of simple as that. That's all the way down in our organization.
Pause. You play to win the game. It's all the way down in our organization. And I imagine he is referring to not just Nick Caserio, the general manager, but also the actual owner. Now, if you were watching the game and you noticed at the very end when the Texans had won things, you noticed Cal McNair in a specific moment looking the way, I'm going to show it to you right now, looking the way that he did right here. Here's a little clip, youtube.com/Paul Gallant, twitch.tv/Gallant Says. Here is Cal McNair not looking so pleased. And again, you're overinterpreting a lot. He's not one that shows a whole lot of emotion, but he doesn't look happy right there when he's on the field after the Texans closed out the season with a 32-31 overtime victory over the Indianapolis Colts. He looks mad. But think about it from Lovey's perspective. He's in an impossible situation the last week of his season, still with the job as head coach of the team, and he has pride. He doesn't want to lose his last game. He doesn't want to tell his players to lose their last game either. He goes out there, puts together a game plan, and the Texans, who were going up against a Colts team quarterbacked by Sam Ehlinger and coached by Jeff Saturday, they did enough to win. And everyone today has been flipping the fuck out over the fact that the Texans don't have the number 1 overall pick in this year's coming draft, that they'll have the number 2 pick. And it has me thinking about things that have all of a sudden become extremely acceptable in the sports watching world, to the point where we say it aloud with no shame, with no embarrassment. I'm talking about how we have begun to accept that every single game doesn't actually matter. Which is funny because these are games. You grew up playing these, probably. Whether it was just pick up, backyard football, 2-hand touch, or it's basketball, soccer. Just about everybody who follows sports has played it at some point in their life, or wanted to play it at some point in their life, if not do it for an actual living. And ultimately, you do want to win a game. Maybe not everybody feels the same way, but the whole entire point of sports is competing. Over the last couple of years, that has become less and less of a thing, at least on a night-to-night basis. And there's science behind it, and that science does make sense to an extent. How do you really benefit yourself if you're the Houston Texans and in the last game of the season, you win if you play well? I guess big picture, it doesn't really benefit you in any way, shape, or form. And while having the number 2 pick does not put you in an absolute disaster of a situation, like having the number 1 overall pick would make things that much better, that has become something that now we just say outwardly. Tanking has become accepted. Resting starters at the end of the season has also become not just accepted, it's become expected. For those who might have been watching the Tennessee Titans the Los Angeles Chargers regular season finale. I saw the light blue and I got confused for a second. Against the Denver Broncos, you might have seen a play at the end of the game where Mike Williams, wide receiver who's been dealing with a lot of health issues with the Chargers over the course of the years too. He gets banged up a lot. The Chargers just don't have good injury luck. Mike Williams in this game against the Broncos gets hurt. Here's the play. It's a screen pass to Williams. If you're watching on Twitch, someone hit him in the lower back, it looks like. They're showing the replay again here. Twitch.tv/Gallant says, YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. Seems like someone came and hit him in the back. What happened? I don't know. He clearly looks shaken up. LA's up 14-10 with 2:17 to play in the second quarter of a game that's meaningless. And after that, there's Brandon Staley, you see in the background. People have started to come after Brandon Staley for the decision. After the game, in fact, we also saw Brandon Staley in a press conference forum being asked about it. Let's shift over to that right here. Again, twitch.tv/Gallant says, youtube.com/Paul Gallant. You want to watch and join along with me.
And so we wanted to make sure that they went.
Here is Brandon Staley being asked about Mike Williams getting hurt and Mike Williams even being in the game.
Trying to compete in the game, and we only have 48 guys on the team that are active for the game. And so we wanted to make sure that they went a good ways in this football game and competed at a high level. And then when we felt like it was right for them to get out of the game, then that's what we were going to do, slowly phase them out so that we get them ready for next week. Why did you feel like that was important? Well, we only get 2 practice squad elevations for the game, and you have to put a team out there, and you can't decide when you're having to play a football game who isn't going to play and who is going to play and how you're going to subtract this. You got to go out there and play the football game, because this isn't the preseason where you have 90 guys to choose from. You only have 48 players to choose from. So you have to go out there, you have to field a football team. And so we did it the best we could. We wanted to play well in the game, and then we wanted to be safe for next week, and that's what we did.
So that's Brandon Staley, the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. I'm not sure how much I agree with said explanation. Hey, we have 48 players. We have to play the right 48 players over the course of a game. We don't have a bigger roster. That's fine, but we are still talking about a starting wide receiver. But everyone's coming after Brandon Staley, wanting to maybe not fire him, but call him out for playing a player in a game that doesn't matter. It's become accepted that you don't, if you're a football team, play your starters in a game that has no consequence to you. You can't get a bye week out of it. You can't get a home playoff game out of it. It's become accepted. And it's smart and it's rational. You do want to minimize the risk of injury. And I suppose in a way you are by benching players over the course of a game. Maybe they'll be a little bit rusty the next time they get on a field. Maybe not. Rest versus rust. That's a conversation we have a lot, right? But between those who advocate for a NFL team to tank so that they get a better draft pick, and people who say that the last couple of games of the regular season, even if there's a chance for you to go undefeated or something like that, you should rest your starters to make sure they're 100% come playoff time, to make sure that there's no chance they get hurt. And load management in basketball. I think we've gotten to a point where we've forgotten that sports are supposed to be competitive on a night-to-night basis. It's a dangerous slope that you find yourself on when all of a sudden you are outright telling the people who are watching your games that game X, Y, or Z does not matter in the slightest before it even starts. And when you tell your fans that, or the people who just consume your product, what do you think they're going to do after a while? And forget about the being pragmatic, rational, smart side of this conversation. I'm just asking, what happens when you continue to tell people who watch these games and watch these sports that a random game in December doesn't matter? We're going to rest, to make a Rockets comparison, we're going to rest Jalen Green. We're going to rest James Harden. We're going to rest, for a Celtics comparison, for me, Jason Tatum. It's just becoming more and more widely accepted. And so many people yesterday, as the Texans won a game against the Indianapolis Colts, which, yes, did not help them out in the long term, but were so pissed off that the Texans had the balls to go for a win. And I just fucking hate those people. The guys who are playing in this game, they are trying their hardest to just have a job in the league next year. Many of them won't, especially with how bad this team's been. So if they want a job next year, they got to play their ass off the last game of the season in the season finale. And there's this collective expectation for fans of a team that struggles that those players won't try hard enough so that the draft picks that replace them, slightly better lottery tickets than they would be with that extra W, potentially get those guys out of work and looking for a job elsewhere. You're asking those guys to mail it in so that their corporation has an easier time replacing them. And they don't get severance out of this. They might not even get an NFL pension out of this if they don't play 3 years. But this is what people are asking for. And I just want to know where it stops. I get it. It's logical to ask for a team to, in the midst of a year where you know they're going nowhere and when everything seems to be going down the toilet, let's just say from the point the Texans benched Davis Mills, which could have been done a lot earlier for Kyle Allen, you knew this thing was not going anywhere positive. At that point, should you stop playing all of your good players altogether? I mean, maybe. But you're just continuing to create more and more moments that don't even fucking matter. And that's just going to increase in volume. You're going to hear more and more about stuff like this in the future. What's the next step of it? Honestly, I don't even know. I just know we're going to hear about this more and more and more and see it more and more and more. And that bums me out. Because ultimately we were talking about a sporting event, something that we grew up enjoying. And because you see no long-term victory in the game, it's meaningless to you. The reason I brought up the NBA as an example is because the NBA regular season's a fucking joke now. Who cares about the NBA regular season? It already means little. And while the league is trying to incentivize players to play the entirety of the year, and maybe they're going to have an in-season tournament and stuff like that, the reality is that an 82-game slate lends itself to a couple of games every now and then, especially on back-to-back, where you're going to realize, you know what, it's not worth it to play my best players. So now you have a lot of regular season games. You might be buying tickets for one. You think you're going to be able to see the star athletes that you saw on the ticket stubs when you purchased them, and then all of a sudden they're not playing in a game. That's just the NBA. This is going to get worse in the NFL. It's going to get worse. Do you want to watch your team playing against another team that's going through the motions? Like, is that an enjoyable experience for you, watching your team play a team like that, a team that's purposefully not playing well? Do you want that? No, you're probably not going to want to watch the game, because best case scenario, your team does what it's expected to do. They blow the other team out. Worst case scenario, they lose to this team that looks like shit and might be ultimately tanking. And the good thing about the NFL and the good thing about college football is that the regular season does have a little bit of meaning. But that's not going to be the case for that much longer. The NFL is going to add an 18th game. At some point, they'll probably add a 19th game. At some point, they'll probably add a 20th game. Every single game along the way means a little bit less. You have teams that want to have a number one overall pick, a quarterback that don't put a lot of money into a competitive roster, who don't give those players and those coaches who actually do have a competitive spirit about them the best chance to win in those situations. When you keep doing that over and over again, more and more people are going to realize that there's a lot of games over the course of the season that don't matter. And to me, that's bad. Forget the not being competitive side of things and how that should be immoral, especially when you're essentially using your players in the NFL as like meat shields, absorbents of just getting the shit kicked out of them so that you get a better draft pick. When that is the realm you put yourself in, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And I hate that it's invaded football the way that it did. And I also don't think that the Texans really sabotaged themselves the way that some people are saying they did by getting the number 2 overall pick in the draft instead of the number 1. That's really all I wanted to vent about today. I, for the life of me, hate the people that want a team to have better draft picks. You're essentially advocating for the bailout of billionaires. And not to sound like a communist all of a sudden or something like that. I'm just saying, if you want to have, like, if you want your ownership group to learn hard lessons, them being rewarded with the first overall pick in a draft is the exact opposite of it. I hate the way that the NFL is set up now. The worst team in the league by default has the number one overall pick. They've incentivized tanking. They know tanking is happening. Now people are so comfortable with the idea of it in the sport that they're advocating for it publicly. And that's fucking bullshit to me. That's what I don't like. Because there's a carryover effect. More and more basketball regular season games are like this. Almost all baseball regular season games feel like this, especially for the Houston Astros with all the games that they've been playing in the American League West over all of these years. Hockey, I imagine there's some similar mindset. I don't watch enough of it to know if there's load management every single night. It does seem like hockey has a little bit more pride and machismo and stuff like that. But all I'm saying here, guys, is that the more and more that you just accept this, the more and more tanking, losing, and non-competing you're going to get. This is just the start. So there's a part of me, that's glad that the Houston Texans ended up with the number 2 overall pick. I do want to give a shout out to the Seattle Seahawks too, because going into this year, didn't we all believe that the Seahawks were essentially going to be tanking to try and get Bryce Young? Because the Denver Broncos pick that they got was going to be a good one, but the Seahawks have Geno Smith under center. They're going to stink this year. That team competed all the way into the playoffs. You've also got the Detroit Lions who were playing like shit in the middle of the year, and I imagine some people were advocating for them to just openly tank, given the fact that maybe they could get a franchise quarterback. No matter what they want to tell us about Jared Goff, they are looking elsewhere. So the Lions start off the year with a 1-6 record. They close out the season by winning 8 of their last 10. They tried. They didn't make the playoffs, but there was this fear, and I think this also has to do with the amount of people that just accept that many games are meaningless big picture. They thought that the Lions wouldn't give a shit about their own pride, about their own ego, about finishing the season above 500, about knocking the Jaguars out of the playoffs. They thought that they would just mail it in, roll over, and die. It's because it's become so accepted. It's because you guys speak it into existence. It's because you guys have made tanking into something that is no longer morally dubious. So shout out to the Seahawks who actually played their asses off this year. Pete Carroll did a great job after Russell Wilson. John Schneider did a great job having the balls to move on from Russell Wilson. That Lions team had nothing to play for, and they still won on Sunday night, and they helped the Seattle Seahawks get into the playoffs too. And there's a lot of you people out there, the people that are pushing for a football team, players in a violent sport, to put their bodies on the line, get the shit kicked out of them so that their bosses can get bailed out. You people suck. I know I've said it a lot on my actual show, The Paul Gallant Show, ESPN 97.5 and 92.5, but all of this stuff is linked. Resting, it starts with tanking. At what point do you realize you're tanking over the course of a year? Do you start at week 2? Do you start at week 3? Do you accept it week 2, week 3? If your team is all totally okay going into a year and saying, yeah, we're not good, we're tanking for better draft picks. If the entire team is like that, you don't have many players that you want to keep around long term. You want people who are competitive to play sports because sports are literally competition. And we've gotten away from that. With tanking, with load management, with resting players before the playoffs. And there's logic behind all of it, but too much logic in sports these days. I don't want to hear a fucking data-driven analysis of why X, Y, and Z is the smartest move for a team. I don't. I don't want to hear that stuff. But that's where we're at. Some comments. Poor Marine, twitch.tv/Gallant says, I could care less if the Texans won or lost. He says, after saying he took a massive Texans earlier today, this is how bad I hate those asshole Texans. When the game was close at the end, I'll admit there was a part of me that was hoping that the Colts would win so that they would get that better draft pick. I will admit it, but I'm not someone that's openly advocating for this team to suck, to lose. And it was a funny game. Davis Mills throws a pick six, but before you thought the Colts were just completely tanking. They fumbled that kickoff. It looked like he was stripped by one of his own players. Sam Ehlinger threw a pick six to Jonathan Grenard, but Mills throws the pick six to the guy. They go for it on 4th and 12. The last drive of the game, they convert it. They go for it on 4th and 20. They convert it. The safety for the Colts just completely whiffed on the ball. God damn. It's so many hilarious moments that add up to this team actually winning. And I just don't like how many of you guys were rooting for them to lose. I get it. It makes sense and all that stuff. But I just think as we go further and further into the future, more and more of you people, I say, you're going to be okay with just the sheer amount of meaninglessness that is in not just baseball and in basketball in terms of the regular season, but soon the NFL and college football with the playoffs expanding. You're minimizing the regular season every single game. You're making it acceptable to rest starters. You're making it acceptable to pull players. You're making it acceptable to not try. It's fucked up. What can be done about it? I honestly don't know. I just know I don't like it, and I don't like the people who root for it. Big thanks to everybody who joined me today on the Paul Gallant Show podcast. Although this is the Gallant Says podcast, I should probably get the name of the show right. If you haven't already, please subscribe, follow on Twitch, twitch.tv/Gallant Says, or youtube.com/Paul Gallant. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. One last couple of comments before we get out of here. Ektelly on 4200 says, I was happy seeing the win, not going to lie. Mike Bowie on YouTube. To me, Lovey got fired because it wasn't a dominant win for his third-string quarterback, Sam Ehlinger. I think he was going to be fired regardless of outcome yesterday. I was talking to somebody before the game, and I was like, what's going on? And they were like, yeah, they're already talking about firing him. Then that Rappaport report came out, and then, of course, you had Jake Glazer talking about how Caserio might be out, too. Caserio's not going to be out. I will be later today at the Houston Texans press conference. It's at 5:30. Nick Caserio and Cal McNair are both going to be there. That ought to be interesting. So if you don't follow me on Twitter, @GallantSays is how you do it. Big thanks to everybody who tuned in. If you haven't already, again, subscribe to the podcast wherever you get it. And make sure that you check out the Paul Gallant Show, ESPN 97.5 and 92.5. Big thanks to everybody, again, who tuned in. I've said that like 6 times. So long. Farewell. Have yourselves a wonderful Monday. Peace.